picture this. You just finished your first draft, and you're excited to get started editing. You open the document, start reading, and you have no idea what you meant by "she did the thing with the emotions" or "add fight scene later." Hi, I'm Rebecca. This is Rebecca's Writings and Ramblings, and today we're gonna ramble about how some typical writing advice, particularly around first drafts, just doesn't work. So yeah, let's get into it. I'm going to start with the advice that just doesn't work, at least for me. Just get words on the page. Any words. Now, while, the point of this is you can't edit a blank page. That is true. But if the words that you put on the page don't make any sense, you can't edit them either. I mean, you can try, but they may not be any more coherent than they were to start with, because you have no idea what you meant. That happen to anybody else? Don't look back. Don't edit as you go. Just keep writing. For some people, this works. It does not work for me. I have to edit a little bit as I go to kind of keep going back and remembering where I'm coming from, because sometimes I run out of order. So if I just wrote a scene in late Act 2 and then I go back to Act 1, I gotta reread and probably while I'm doing it, edit the earlier parts of Act 1 so I can remember what was going on. And then I also say quality over quantity. You can fix anything in editing. And no, you can't. What that leaves you with. And the quality over quantity, I think, really came about due to NaNoWriMo and these write X amount of words in a certain amount of time challenges. Because if the goal is just to write words, it doesn't matter the quality of the words. And the fact is that if you just put words on the page, not caring if they make sense or if they're going to even be usable later, then you have, at the end, a draft, an unusable draft usually, with placeholders and half-baked thoughts. It's not going to get you to a final novel. Now, maybe you know exactly what you meant by "she did the thing with the emotions." And if that's you, that's cool. Can you give me tips on remembering what you mean when you leave notes to yourself? Because I never remember the notes later. So I use what I call a clean enough discovery draft. Or first draft, whatever you want to call it. What do I mean by clean enough? It's not about perfect prose or beautiful sentences. It's about creating a draft that I can actually work with when I come back to it, or when I jump around and need to make sense of what I was doing earlier. So clean enough means that my sentences are complete thoughts. Instead of writing "fight scene here" or make things more emotional, I write enough that I know what the fight is about. It's not just these two characters are going to fight. It's the purpose of they're going to fight, and here's the purpose of the fight, and probably the outcome of the fight. And this won't necessarily go blow by blow with what happened. I'll add that back in. I'll add that in later in editing. And that means that if I'm writing dialogue, I include enough context that I remember who's speaking and why. You ever gone back and tried to edit dialogue and you're like, I have 3 characters. Who said that? It doesn't make sense if they said that, but it looks like they said that. I have done that so many times and I'm just like, what was I doing? For me, this works as a balance of leaving myself breadcrumbs, in a line that makes sense, rather than just tossing crumbs out behind me. I'm leaving specific crumbs in specific places that make sense, and I will be able to logically follow later in my editing process. So how do you balance with this? How do you balance forward momentum with functional clarity? Sorry. How do you balance forward momentum with functional clarity when you're doing this? The key is finding out what's necessary for you. My process may not work exactly for you because you're a different person and your brain works differently. That's why I find writing such a fascinating craft, is there are 5,000 ways to do it right. It just depends on how your brain works. And sometimes if you're trying to follow somebody else's step-by-step guide, you're never going to get to where you need to be because that guide just doesn't work for you. So for me, that's finding what moves you forward and avoiding perfectionism, procrastination, which is one of my bigger issues when it comes to drafting, particularly an issue that I had with drafting Shadow Tales, the sequel to my book that came out last September, is, I'd spent so much time before that working on the final draft of Cold Wings, which was, I don't think it's perfect. I don't think it can ever be perfect, but it was, very polished prose, as opposed to first draft prose I was working on in Shadow Tales, and I was just like, this isn't good enough. So that was the struggle I was having there. The new projects I'm working on, I'm using this new approach, and they're not tied to a series, so that's kind of giving me a little more freedom with it, but two, I'm letting go of that need for perfectionism in draft one. Or at least I'm trying to. So it's fine with writing she was angry and then going back and adding the more showing details of that later. I don't need to find a metaphor for how she was angry or anything like that. I can just say she said it weird instead of coming... No. But I can't write, she said it weird. That's too vague. What does weird mean? She said it and her voice cracked, or she spoke really slowly, like she was confused. Like, what does weird mean? I also realize that sometimes I need to pause to get the scene right. Because if it's not working, I'll end up throwing out everything that comes after that moment. If I'm writing a conversation and then I name it feeling wrong, I have to fix it then. I can't just blah something out and then come back later. Because that dynamic in that conversation reflects the entire arc after. Not effects. Effects, not reflex. Sorry. I misspoke. But it's also, if I'm pausing too much in a scene and I'm not being able to go forward, to just kind of scrap that scene and start over. Like, I just have to know when leaving myself a note on how to come back to it later will actually help move the story forward in that moment. Sometimes you have to stay stuck a minute in order for things to make sense, and sometimes you can just say she did the thing, except with more details than that. So, like, before a scene might look like she was upset about the thing, I need to make this more dramatic and add backstory and then fix the scene later. It's not working right now. Yeah, that's a whole, 3-sentence scene where I have no idea what I'm actually going to write when I come back to edit that. Now, I would have a clearer version. I would have, she was upset, but then I would add details like she was upset not about the thing. The thing was, she was upset about her dad not showing up. the event, and then I would go into a backstory about how her dad typically didn't show up at things. And yeah, I could just say, like, add in a backstory about her dad not showing up at other events and why it affects her. But since I have that concrete thing of that's what she's upset about now, adding a backstory about her dad makes more sense because I know why it needs to be there. And the fight scenes, again, I used to just be like, add fight scene later, because I could be in a certain mood during a fight scene, and yeah, so I'd just be like, I'll write this when I feel more like writing it. But now, and then I'll go on to the, I'll be like, I'll write this when I feel like writing it, and then I'll move on to the scene after, not knowing what happens. So now I will be like, Nahara and Taliesin fight, but Talieson's logic wins out. And so maybe I don't know every word of the fight going into the next scene. I know that Talieson's logical solution to whatever they're fighting about is what the conversation ended with. So I know, like, okay, that's the path they're going on. Whereas if I hadn't, written that in my notes, I'd be like, wait, who won the fight? What is the plan going forward? So how does this make editing more efficient? Well, I'm not trying to figure out what I meant by she did the thing, or add fight scene here, because if I just do add fight scene here without details, I have to go back before, figure out what the fight was about, I have to go after to see how I thought the fight was ending, or how I vaguely avoided going into actually the fight while doing that. So yeah, you can actually focus on strengthening the draft rather than what the heck did I mean by this? It's like the difference between renovating a house with good bones and renovating a house that needs 5,000 updates before you can actually start the renovation. You ever watch those shows on HGTV where they are going to do an update, but they open up the wall and, oh no, you have old plumbing, we have to replan the entire house, or something like that. So this is avoiding having to replan the entire house by doing it right the first time. Or at least doing it good enough the first time to where you can wait like another 10 years before you redo the whole house. I found that when I write with just enough clarity in the moment, I'm not just throwing in random events and hoping that they'll make sense later. I actually think through the cause and effect, and there are less plot holes to fix and revision. There are still plot holes. I'm not sure it's possible to get through a draft without plot holes because my characters sometimes just decide, hey, I want this thing, let's do this. But the time I lose writing clear first drafts is going back, often more so, doing editing them. And honestly, I enjoy the process more because I'm not constantly frustrated by those cryptic notes that I left on myself. So, what's your writing process, and have you ever tried to do a clean enough draft? I remember that functional drafts are better than worrying about it being perfect the first time. And if you just get out something and you can't make sense of it later, then was it really useful, or are you going to have to go back and start over? So, what's your process when it comes to that? Let me know down in the comments. And like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to see more from me. I post new videos once a week, and I will see you all soon with a new one. Bye!